The wind howled relentlessly through the empty stretch of road, the snow swirling around the car in a maddening dance. Kayla could barely see beyond the windshield, the swirling white flurries blurring the world outside. Her father, Marcus, kept his hands tightly gripping the steering wheel, his eyes fixed ahead, though his gaze was distant, lost somewhere in the storm. Kayla, sitting in the passenger seat, tried to ignore the unease creeping up her spine. There was something wrong about this whole situation. The road was too quiet. The storm too fierce. "Dad, we should have turned back when we had the chance," she said softly, trying to break the silence that had settled between them. Marcus glanced at her, his face hard, like the years of raising a daughter on his own had weathered him to the point where softness was a foreign concept. He was a man of few words, and though Kayla had grown used to his silence over the years, it still unsettled her. Especially now. "You'll be fine. It's just a storm. We'll get through it," Marcus muttered, his voice barely audible over the wind's relentless howls. The car tires crunched through the snow, each rotation seeming like it might be the last. They were headed for a small town up ahead, a place Marcus had visited once when he was younger, but not in recent years. An old friend had invited them to stay the night, a chance to rest before the long drive home. Kayla had been reluctant from the start, but Marcus had insisted. They could take a break, stretch their legs, maybe even enjoy a warm meal before heading back to the city. But as the minutes stretched into hours, Kayla couldn't shake the growing feeling that something was very wrong. The further they drove, the more the world seemed to close in on them. The road was desolate, the trees on either side like shadowy sentinels watching them pass by. The headlights of the car did little to dispel the darkness, and it felt as though they were driving through an endless, snow-covered void. "Just a little further," Marcus said, his voice more to himself than to her. Kayla nodded, trying to focus on the small town ahead. It was supposed to be a peaceful little place, according to Marcus. But as they neared the town's outskirts, something shifted in the air. The storm intensified, the snow swirling even faster, and the town suddenly appeared out of nowhere, a dark silhouette against the blinding whiteness. As the car drew closer, Kayla could make out the outlines of old houses, the windows dark and empty. The town felt abandoned, frozen in time, like something had gone wrong long ago, and no one had ever bothered to fix it. "We're almost there," Marcus said, his voice strained. He looked at Kayla again, but this time there was something else in his eyes, a hint of uncertainty that made her blood run cold. Before she could ask him what was wrong, the car jolted, and Marcus cursed under his breath. The engine sputtered and then died completely. For a moment, the car was silent except for the howling wind. "Dad?" Kayla's voice trembled, but Marcus was already trying to restart the engine. Nothing happened. "I don't understand," Marcus muttered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "This car has never given me trouble before." Kayla could hear the faint edge of panic in his voice. That was enough to send her heart racing. They were stranded in the middle of nowhere, in a storm that was quickly becoming a blizzard. There was no sign of life in the town ahead, no lights, no movement. They were alone. "Dad, I think we should." Before she could finish, there was a sudden knock on the window. Kayla's blood ran cold. Kayla's breath caught in her throat. The knock on the window was so loud it seemed to echo in the cramped space of the car. She turned slowly, her eyes wide, her heart pounding in her chest. Through the swirling snow, a shadowy figure stood outside, cloaked in the storm's fury. Kayla could barely make out the details, but the figure's presence was unmistakable. "Dad," she whispered, but Marcus didn't seem to hear her. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. His focus was elsewhere, as if the knock hadn't even registered. Kayla's gaze shifted back to the window, but the figure was gone. "Dad, I swear I saw someone," she trailed off, unsure if she had imagined it. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He was still staring ahead, trying to get the engine to start. The silence stretched between them, thicker than the snow falling outside. Then, with a groan, the engine sputtered back to life. Marcus exhaled in relief. "See? We're fine," he muttered, though his voice didn't sound as certain as before. But Kayla wasn't convinced. Something was off about this place. The town, the storm, the figure outside, it all felt wrong, like they had crossed into some forgotten corner of the world where time had stopped, and dark secrets were buried beneath the snow. Marcus began driving again, the headlights barely cutting through the thickening snow. As they passed the outskirts of the town, Kayla saw the flickering lights of a small house ahead. It was the only sign of life they had seen since entering the town. "Let's head there," Marcus said, his voice more forceful now. "I'm sure they'll be able to help us." Kayla didn't argue. There was no other choice. They needed shelter. The wind was picking up, and the storm was growing worse by the minute. As they pulled into the driveway, the house seemed even more isolated than before. There was no movement from inside, no warmth emanating from the windows. Marcus knocked on the door, his fist coming down harder than necessary, but the silence that followed was suffocating. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly man with a weathered face and deep-set eyes. "Can I help you?" The man's voice was raspy, and Kayla noticed that he didn't seem particularly surprised to see them. "We're stranded," Marcus explained quickly. "Our car broke down, and we need a place to wait out the storm." The man looked at them for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I don't usually take in strangers, but the storm's not letting up. Come inside. I'll fix you something warm." Kayla was hesitant, but Marcus didn't wait for her opinion. He stepped inside, and after a moment of hesitation, Kayla followed him. The interior of the house was dark, the faint smell of wood smoke hanging in the air. It was small and cluttered, with old furniture scattered haphazardly around the room. The man led them into a small living room and gestured to a pair of chairs by the fire. "Sit," he ordered, and Kayla did as she was told, though she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Something about this place, this man, unsettled her. The man disappeared into the kitchen, and Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his hands together. Kayla couldn't take her eyes off the old man. He moved slowly, almost like he was trying to avoid being noticed. When he returned, he carried 2 mugs of steaming tea. He handed one to Marcus, but when he reached for Kayla, his hand stopped mid-air. "Don't drink it," the old man said suddenly. "Not yet." Kayla froze. His voice was cold, and for a moment, it sounded as though he was speaking to her as though he already knew something she didn't. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, a frown creasing his forehead. "There's something in the town. Something you need to understand before you make a choice," the man said, his gaze flicking to Kayla. His eyes darkened. "You won't like what you find, but you must know the truth." Marcus stiffened. "What are you talking about?" The old man slowly sat down across from them, his hands folded in his lap. "The storm you're caught in," he said softly, "isn't natural. And neither is this town. It's not just snow that blankets these streets, it's a curse." The words hung in the air, thick with meaning. Kayla felt her breath catch in her throat, her mind racing to comprehend the gravity of what the man was saying. She glanced at her father, but he was staring at the old man, his expression unreadable. "Why are you telling us this?" Kayla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The old man's lips twitched. "Because you need to leave. Tonight. Or else." His voice trailed off, and Kayla didn't need to hear the rest. She could feel it in the air, the weight of something ancient and malevolent, lurking just beyond the edges of her perception. She looked out the window, the snow swirling with a strange urgency, and a sudden feeling of dread washed over her. Something in the town was watching them. And it wasn't friendly. Kayla's heart raced as she glanced nervously at the window. The swirling snow outside now appeared almost alive, as though it were moving with purpose. The wind howled fiercely, battering against the house like an invisible hand trying to break through. She tightened her grip on the mug the old man had given her, but her fingers were stiff, as if the warmth had vanished the moment she touched it. The man sat silently across from them, his eyes fixed on the fire in the hearth. His gaze was distant, as if lost in memories, or perhaps in something much darker. Marcus, still confused but determined, leaned forward. "Why won't you tell us what's going on?" he demanded, his voice growing impatient. "What do you mean by curse? You're telling us this storm's not natural." The old man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared into the flames, his face hardening. Kayla's curiosity grew, but she was cautious. The air felt charged, as though something was about to happen, something beyond her understanding. "You're not from here, are you?" the old man asked after a long pause. His voice was softer now, almost like he was speaking to himself. "You wouldn't know. But this town, it's been hidden, isolated from the rest of the world for years." Marcus and Kayla exchanged a glance, a silent question passing between them. Kayla felt a chill crawl up her spine. The air in the room had thickened, weighed down by the oppressive tension. "Why?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but demanding answers. The old man's face tightened. "Because of what's buried here," he said, his voice so low that Kayla almost couldn't hear him. "And because of who's buried here." "Who?" Kayla whispered, leaning in without realizing it. The old man's eyes flickered toward her. "The townspeople. They never leave." "Not truly." Kayla's heart skipped a beat. "You mean, they're dead?" "No," the old man replied. "They're cursed. They live. But they don't live. They're trapped. Just like this town." Kayla's mind reeled. It was as if she had stumbled upon a secret too dark to grasp, a secret that wasn't meant for her ears. "Why are you telling us this?" Marcus asked, the skepticism in his voice mixed with a newfound urgency. "What do we have to do with it?" The old man's eyes locked onto Marcus. "Because the storm is coming. It always comes when the curse is about to renew. And when it does, it claims anyone who stays. You can leave, but you must act quickly." Kayla looked out the window, the swirling snow now blurring the dark outlines of the town. Every instinct told her that they weren't safe here, not in this house, not in this town. "We've stayed too long," the old man continued. "You've already seen the signs. The figures in the snow. The whispers on the wind. It won't be long before the town starts changing." Kayla felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Her mind raced. Figures in the snow. Whispers. She had seen them, hadn't she? When she thought she saw someone outside the car. Had it been a warning? Her pulse quickened. "We need to go, Dad," she said, her voice trembling. But Marcus didn't move. He stood and walked to the window, staring out into the darkness beyond. The old man's warning echoed in his mind, but he wasn't ready to admit that they might be in more danger than he realized. He had always been the protector, the one who kept things under control. He couldn't let fear get the best of him, not now. "We can't just run off into the storm without a plan," Marcus muttered. "We don't even know where we're going." The old man's voice cut through the tension in the room. "You know enough," he said, his tone grim. "Go to the church. That's where you'll find the answers." "The church?" Kayla repeated, confused. "But how?" "Just go," the old man insisted, rising from his seat. "Go to the church, and you'll understand. But remember this, it's the only place where you'll be safe. The storm won't stop until it's claimed its toll." With a heavy heart, Marcus nodded. The decision was made, but the fear still lingered in the air like smoke, choking their hope. The snow was falling even harder now, the wind a shrieking beast outside the small house. Marcus grabbed his jacket and nodded toward Kayla. Let's go. We don't have much time. They stepped outside into the freezing night, the air sharp against their skin. The wind howled as they trudged through the deep snow toward the church, which was just visible in the distance. The house behind them seemed to vanish into the storm as if it was swallowed whole by the blizzard. As they neared the church, the atmosphere grew heavier. It wasn't just the cold, it was the oppressive feeling of being watched. Every time they turned a corner or passed a shadow, Kayla felt her pulse quicken, her breath shallow. The church loomed ahead, a looming silhouette against the backdrop of swirling white. It was old, ancient, even, but there was something strangely familiar about it, like it had been standing there forever. But as they reached the doors, something stopped them.